All right, we're continuing Ecclesiastes. Solomon's reflection on life. Everything is vanity. There's nothing new under the sun. You're going to die one day. All right, so I believe we left off at chapter 2, verse 12. So we'll resume here. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. So we're going through the steps of Solomon's life. At first, he pursues pleasure, see what he can get out of that, and now that he's done with pursuing pleasure, he finds that it's vanity as well. He now goes on to the pursuit of wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man who do who comes after the king? Only what he has already done. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. All right, so that's very important. So a lot of times this book is just very down on everything. But we want to pay close attention. So in the midst of all this vanity, everything is vanity. Solomon never considers wisdom to be vanity. All right, even though the wise man goes the same fate as the fool, they both end up dead. He finds that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. All right, so even though both come to the same end, the wise man and the fool, wisdom is preferred. Verse 14. The wise man has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that one fate comes to all of them. Then I said to myself, what befalls the fool will befall me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said to myself that this also is vanity. For the wise man, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise man dies, just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity, and is striving after wind. Verse 18 brings us to another progression in his thought, right? His intellectual biography, so to speak. I hated all my toil in which I had toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to a man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled, and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a man who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave all to be enjoyed by a man who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and strain with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of pain, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his mind does not rest. This also is vanity. Verse 24 then is one of the important themes of the book. It's an idea that gets repeated again and again. And it's almost like kind of the conclusion. This is the beginning of the insight he starts to see. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. All right, so overstoring up your goods, putting all your time and attention to that is a vanity. But enjoying the act of storing up, enjoying leaving behind something as an inheritance, all right? Also living in the moment, not always looking towards the future. That is something that is good, all right? That's from the hand of God. That man eat, that man drink, and that he enjoy his work. That is God's purpose for man in this life. All right, that is how God has made us. We need to eat and drink. We need to be doing some kind of work. So enjoy that process. everything else is vanity. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For as the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the work of gathering and heaping, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is a vanity and striving after wind. Chapter 3, there's a very famous 60s song that quotes this part of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season and a time, for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? Verse 10. Not everything in this book is depressing, as we see in verse 10. I have seen the business that God has given to the sons of men to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has put eternity into man's mind, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. All right, so this is like part of the contradiction of human nature, is that God has placed us in creation, which is beautiful, but simultaneously, this isn't our home. He's put eternity into our mind. There's always this, familiarity where we feel at home here, but at the same time, we're never going to feel at home while we're alive here because we're made for something more. All right, there's this eternal calling that we all have that gets fulfilled ultimately in the beatific vision. Verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Also that it is God's gift to man, and that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. All right, that theme is repeated again. This is what man's put on earth to do, to eat, drink, and be merry in his toil. I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has made it so in order that men should fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. So in this idea of Ecclesiastes, we get this idea of, it's good for man to eat. It's good for man to drink and make merry. It's good for man to enjoy his work. All these things are good things. Sometimes we can get a little confused and think of them as bad. Especially if maybe you think about examples of saints. Like look at St. Francis of Assisi. He gave up everything. He embraced radical poverty. All right, he did not, his life was a little bit different. Or any kind of contemplative order of nuns who shunned the world, right, and cut themselves off and focus on, their times of doing prayer and contemplation. But at that same token, you have to understand something, is that the life of those saints, it's a sacrifice. When you give up something that's evil, that's not making a sacrifice. Because you're giving up what was bad and moving on to what was good. That's like just an improvement for yourself. For something to be a sacrifice, you have to let go of something that is good in the first place to begin with. All right, so like religious who give up marriage because they have a higher calling, a higher vocation, doesn't mean that marriage isn't a good vocation, right? But what they're giving up is something good that man's made for in order to then achieve something higher. All right, in that what they're trying to achieve is, an imitation of Christ, something more wonderful than simply marriage. Also, if you think about saints who are ascetics, like Saint Francis of Assisi, who gave up everything and embraced radical poverty, who's going to appreciate every meal they receive? Right? The radical Saint Francis who's living in poverty, right? Or the person who is so engrossed in the world that they just kind of like eat meals in between, the crazy work shifts or what have you. Okay? When you give up those things as your main pursuit, right, and you enter into, say, a contemplative religious order, those are the people who take most delight in their toils, who take most appreciation, all right, into their eating and their drinking, because it's done with intentionality and they can really appreciate the value that it has. Because what they do is they see everything, they spend their time putting everything into the perspective of God. All right, whereas those of us who don't have that vocation, sometimes we get caught up, all right, either by temptations from the world or from the devil, and then we get distracted, and then we're no longer appreciating mealtime with our family, all right, or we end up disliking our work because we're just begrudgingly trying to move from paycheck to paycheck. All right, but these things are good. You should be enjoying the gifts that God has given you. And if you give them up for something higher, that doesn't mean that they weren't good in the first place. It's more of an affirmation that they were good initially. Verse 16, chapter 3, verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. In the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for he has appointed a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart, with regard to the sons of men, that God is testing them, to show them that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Verse 21, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward, and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth? Who knows? So this is Solomon's personal musings. Make a note here to chapter 12, verse 7. Because if you just look at this out of context, it looks like, okay, is the Bible actually seriously doubting that men live after death and that we have a different fate from, say, lesser material animals who don't have immortal souls? So this is just him simply musing, asking a question. And in chapter 12, verse 7, we'll see that he gives a definitive answer to this question he lays out here. Verse 22, he repeats again, so I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should enjoy his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Chapter 4. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are practiced under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living, who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw all toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity, and is striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after wind. Again I saw vanity under the sun, a person who has no one, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is a vanity and an unhappy business. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they are warm. But how can one be warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king, who will no longer take advice, even though he had gone from prison to the throne, or in his own kingdom had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, as well as that youth who was to stand in his place. There was no end of all the people. He was over all of them. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity, and is striving after the wind. All right? So you become CEO of Coca-Cola. Nice. When you die, and people are still working at Coca-Cola 20 years from now, no one's going to care about you. It's all vanity. Chapter 5. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near, to listen, is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. For they do not know that they are doing evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you upon the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Kind of a similar theme to what we saw earlier in Proverbs, where he's always extolling the man who keeps his mouth shut as wise, whereas the man who talks a lot is the one who causes much vexation in his life. When you vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the works of your hands? For when dreams increase, empty words grow many, but you must fear God. If you see in a province the poor oppressed and justice and right violently taken away, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But in all, a king is an advantage to the land with cultivated fields. All right, so don't be amazed when the poor are being oppressed, but you can know that God is also keeping an eye on the oppressor, and that all evil men will receive their just rewards in the day of judgment. Jump ahead to verse 18. Chapter 5, verse 18. Behold, what I have seen to be good and to be fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life, which God has given him, for this is his lot. Jump ahead to chapter 6. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy upon men. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a sore affliction. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but he does not enjoy life's good things, and also has no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better off than he. For it comes into vanity and goes into darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. All right, we'll stop here and take our break and resume in 5 minutes.